I knew about last week, but I wasn't sure about this week. What does it mean when the lights blink on the microphone?
Mine was blinking last night.
Yeah, but I don't know what it means.
It means when it stops blinking, it's about to go blow up.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, well.
It's, yeah, Michael.
Why don't you take this one? Here comes the Vice Mayor. There's something on Facebook. I'll send it to you.
Evening.
Hey, stranger.
Made it.
There you are. We think that one's probably not very good, so use this one.
Okay.
Okay, just clock on the wall is just turned over to 6 o'clock. And those of us who are, there we go. So it's now 6 o'clock according to the clock on the wall, and we will call this meeting to order. First item of business is the roll call. Madam Clerk?
Counselor Payne,
Here?
Counselor Pinkston is joining electronically.
Right.
Counselor Puryear is still away. Mayor Snook,
Here?
Vice Mayor Wade.
Here.
Okay.
Okay.
Having established a physical quorum, council will consider a request from Counselor Pinkston made on March 22nd to participate electronically pursuant to council's adopted procedures in compliance with Virginia Freedom of Information Statute for meeting participation through electronic communication means. Mr. Pinkston, are you able to hear me?
I am.
Okay. Are participants in the meeting room able to hear Mr. Pinkston?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Mr. Pinkston, you noted in your request that you would be absent for a personal matter. For the record, would you please specify the nature of your personal matter and your remote location?
Yes, I'm in Williamsburg, Virginia. I am attending a professional conference that's connected to my day job.
Okay. Based on compliance with the policy, is there a motion?
I would move to approve Counselor Pinkston's electronic participation in this work session.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Okay.
Okay. Turn the meeting back over to Mayor Snook.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. So we first have one action item, a resolution, City Council support for the Charlottesville City Schools application for School Construction Assistance Program grant funding. Ms. Hamill is going to summarize things for us.
Yeah, thank you. So the General Assembly in 2022 took an action and appropriation of about $450 million for the School Construction Assistance Program. This is a competitive grants program in which schools can apply to use the money for construction, expansion, or modernization of public school buildings. In order to do this, the school board has worked with staff, and they have been working on the application, and as part of that application, there needs to be a letter of support from council for that. We have drafted that letter. Do you want to read that, Mayor Snook, or?
Actually, I just gave it back to Ms. Thomas. Let's get it. Okay, the letter reads, March 30th, 2023, to whom it may concern, Charlottesville has a longstanding commitment to prioritize funding for public school operations. It has been the historical practice of City Council to add 40% of all new real estate and personal property revenue each year to the city's contribution to schools. This funding is in addition to the debt service that the city also funds for all school projects, including the debt service that will be due on the financing for the Charlottesville Middle School project on the current Buford Middle School campus. So while we can't absolutely commit funding decisions for future councils, all of this can serve as evidence that the city of Charlottesville remains committed to funding its school division. Sincerely yours, Lloyd Snook, Mayor, City of Charlottesville. And so does that then need to be moved and seconded, authorizing me to send that letter? Is that the deal?
Yes, please. And just one other note, I failed to mention, so the part of the grants, if approved, they will award either 10, 20, or 30% of any approved projects. So if we were to receive the grant at a minimum, if we were to apply this to the Beaufort project, we would be in the $7 to $8 million range.
Great, thank you. So can I have a motion?
I move that we approve the letter to support the grant.
Second?
Okay, any discussion? Ms. Thomas, you want to call the roll?
Counselor Payne?
Yes?
Mayor Snook?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Wade?
Yes.
And
Counselor Pinkston, sorry.
Yes.
Thank you.
okay, that motion passes 4-0. Thank you. So we have that matter resolved, and we'll wish for good luck.
Right.
Thank you. So the second item on the agenda is the work session on the budget and the capital improvement plan in particular. Mr. Rogers and Ms. Hamel?
Yes, sir. I'll kick it off. Tonight, our focus is the capital improvement plan. There was a preview several months back. We're going to highlight tonight the LED streetlight project and the Beaufort School project. Let me note, with respect to Beaufort School, we've started to get a lot of emails about support for the project. I remind people that council supported the project last year at $68 million, and that in the intervening year, there has been some inflationary costs that have been added. I understand that that's been taking the project to $72 million, and I'm looking at Mike Goddard. That is right, right?
That's what's in the budget for 23.
For 23?
I'm sorry, for 24,
For 24, right.
but they're, yeah.
So the point I'm making is that council approved a project that, for $68 million, that did not include the auditorium and did not include additional items to it. So you'll hear tonight that there's some discussion about other items that have been priced. So that's a decision point. And we have to examine carefully whether the additions that will be discussed can be accommodated, in the capital improvement plan. So that puts us right back where we were in the discussion last year of whether what is requested can be accommodated with our current debt obligations. Then we will discuss debt capacity. We will discuss the FY24 revenue adjustments. As I said last week, we work with the revenue team to constantly monitor the revenue trends. And when they see trends that have landed at a certain place that's beyond what we first proposed or they first recommended, then adjustments can be made. So that would mean additional dollars in the FY '24 budget for council to make decisions on. And then we will talk about the FY '23 projected results as we know them today. So Chrissy, you want to go on to?
Sure, thank
First
you.
one.
So I'm gonna just take a couple minutes to just do a brief walk back through a summary of the proposed 5-year plan. This is what's in the proposed budget that is online. As you know, over the 5 years, it's about $186 million. For FY '24, excuse me, it's $98.9 million. The largest piece of that is the Beaufort School project, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. Of this, we anticipate bonding about $129 million, and that's all I have to say about that summary slide. So moving on real quickly, for the education projects that are in here, $76.8 million in '24 and $97.7 million over the 5-year total. You can see a listing of the projects there. And again, this is both bondable and non-bondable. This is just total. Facilities projects, $2.9 million in '24, $10.7 million over the 5 years. One thing to note, one add here that based from the time we presented this to the Planning Commission, there is $1 million that has been added for climate action initiatives. At this point, as we've talked about, these dollars are going to be used to help leverage grants and other initiatives as we find them in the CIP. Also, the Ravenna, Baylor, and Bailing facility has been added that was not in the original Planning Commission version. Public safety projects, 1.3 in '24 and $5.5 million over the 5 years. Transportation and access, 7.2 over 20 in '24 and 30.7 over the 5 years. Parks and Rec, 2 million in '24 and 6.1 over the 5 years. Technology and infrastructure, 290,000 in '24 and 1.5 over the 5 years. Any questions on that before we dive into some more specifics?
Yeah, the police, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Which one?
The public safety project.
Just public safety in
Yeah.
general, or the police ones?
So I see the specifics now, because I know that this is not part of this, but is there plans at some point in the future to upgrade their facilities? Because I know it's kind of old, and it's been talked for several years. I don't know if you've heard anything about that.
So there have been plans or requests that have come forward previously. There is currently no plan at this point. But you are correct, there have been asks, and then at one point it was withdrawn, and so it
Okay.
has not been fully vetted at this point.
Thank you.
To follow up.
So
on
what
that-
request was that?
Sure, go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry, what request were you referring to, Vice Mayor Wade?
Yes, it was for the police, the department, their headquarters, just
Oh,
to
okay.
update renovations, type of improvements outside of just regular maintenance type of thing. So, and I was informed that there have been talks, they've been on the board, off the board, and right now they're off the board, so that's kind of where we are.
And relatedly, I don't see in the list the bypass fire station. Did I miss that?
The bypass fire station was the most of the funding was completed in the 23, the current year, CIP.
Got it.
What's listed here was just some remaining dollars that were needed for furniture and fixtures in the building that weren't included in the, original budget. But
Okay.
that is fully funded, well, fully funded at this point, based on the request.
Okay, thank you.
To follow up on Vice Mayor Wade's question about the police department, my vague recollection is that when the General District Court moves out of its current facilities up to the, hopefully, to be completed in FY '25, I think, up on Court Square, that would open up a large portion of City Hall real estate that is already right next to the police department, and that was being talked about as part of a plan for redoing the whole police department. Is that still sort of the vague thought?
There's been no further conversation on what to do with that space. Have you heard
Okay.
anything different? Yeah, it just hasn't risen to that level yet.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on?
Actually, I do have
I mean, I
one.
definitely have some detailed questions, but I think maybe I'll just wait to the end of the presentation.
Okay.
The other question I had was, things on the transportation and access project, the sidewalk repairs, the first few items that have annual recurring amounts appearing. Do I understand that those are amounts that are added to a fund that continues to be spent down on an annual basis?
That's correct. And
What
that-
is the current balance on those funds, roughly? I mean, are we close to spending them down, or are we still adding to, I mean, at least at one point, a couple of years ago, they were up over $500,000 in some of those funds, with no spending having been done.
Do you have that?
Yeah, I don't have those numbers in front of me, but I can say to you, the ongoing conversation that I've been having is about our spend rate. We have accumulated funds in those categories that have not gone out as fast as we would like them to. Part of our issue is capacity, so with
Right.
that added capacity, it will increase. We can get those numbers for you as to what the accumulated amounts are, but we don't have them right now.
Okay, thank you. That's all I got.
And Mr. Sanders, we have, I mean, I think you're bringing on new staff, right, to help
Yes.
increase your capacity?
Yeah, in a variety of ways. I mean, most of what we would continue the conversations I've been having about what our spend rate has been is mostly associated with the fact that we don't have the hands that we need. As we get those positions filled, which we have been able to advertise, we haven't been able to fill all of them. It should begin to pick up this year.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Hamel, would you rather me wait for more detailed questions to the end?
Completely your preference.
Dive in.
Okay. Is that okay with you, Mayor Snook, or would you rather me
Yes,
wait?
That's fine.
Okay. Stribling Avenue, the 4.2, so that's basically making good on the commitment from a number of years ago, or a year ago, I guess. Is that piece working out in terms of, can you remind me, Mr. Rogers, of how that was going to work with, I guess, tax deferrals that was going to be used to fund this?
The contractor had set aside some funds to work with us on that project, and that was hung up with a court suit.
Yeah,
There's been no progress.
correct. There's a lawsuit was filed shortly after we made the decision to accept the instrument, which is the use of the funds from the developer. That has not made its way to court yet for a resolution. That does not prevent us from still moving forward on the project. We actually have been working to identify funds to start design. I've been working with the team to make sure that that begins. And then we will also need to set aside funds for right-of-way acquisition. That'll be a part of FY '25's ask. And then after that is done, then we will accelerate the construction of the sidewalk so that it aligns with the development itself.
Do we have any update on the status of the lawsuit? I guess that's something we can talk about at another time, but.
Yeah, we thought it was going to be heard at the end of the year. There was a change in judgeships, is what I understand, and that prevented that particular item from making it through before the end of the year. So it has been in a pending status and the city attorney's office has yet to confirm when they think it's going to be heard. But as soon as that is resolved, it'll at least eliminate any confusion that may exist, but we have assured the public that that does not stop us from doing the work that needs to be done in the interim.
Excellent. Traffic signal replacement, 3.7, it's 2.7 greater than the other outlying years. Is there a special project that's going to be happening there?
Yes, there's work that was done to identify some problem infrastructure, basically some vulnerable infrastructure that we're afraid will not be able to survive too much longer. So we're going to be replacing the entire structures immediately upon the funding being available for us to spend in that manner. I can't remember exactly how many, I think I want to say 6.
I was gonna say 5.
5 or 6 that'll be replaced, but this is a singular project, and then the ongoing work will continue in future years.
Okay, it's good to hear we're doing that. Downtown mall infrastructure, is that number seems low to me. Is there some basis for it?
That account is funded through the cafe permit fees that are paid each year. That's basically a projection of what those fees might be. And again, like all the CIP budgets, those funds do accumulate. And I apologize, I do not know roughly how much is in there at this point, but we could get that for you. So this would be in addition to an existing balance.
And I know that, Mr. Sanders, I know you all have been working on sort of the maintenance backlog, categorizing that and summarizing the needs there. So I'd be interested in knowing what that looks like. Was the question about invasive species, was that something that would have fit here under the trees piece, or is that in the general fund question?
It was requested as a new CIP request.
Uh-huh.
So to your point, it could either be addressed in the operating budget, which would be the general fund, or here. If we put it here, it would be cash funded, and those funds would, carry over if they weren't all spent.
Okay. And then bus purchases, 240,120.75. Is this our portion of a federal match?
It is.
Climate action initiatives. I mean, do we really feel like we're going to spend $1 million right off the bat? I mean, would it make more sense to have $500,000 one year and half in another? Or is that for leveraging grants?
So that's actually 2 amounts of money combined. $500,000 is intended to be bondable. So as the climate team identifies projects that they can initiate this year, they will have the resources to do so. The other $500,000 is a match fund, so that they have the ability to apply for grants. They're in the process right now of preparing a large proposal to the federal government that would use all of that money if we were successful in getting that grant. If we don't end up receiving that particular grant, then the pool is available for them to pursue other, and they don't have to come back and ask for it. That was ultimately the decision that we wanted to make, in that council has identified climate as a priority, so we wanted to give the team some flexibility to be able to do whatever they felt they could do this year as a part of their work plan.
That's fantastic. HB2 Fontaine Avenue project. What is that? Is that something we've seen before?
That is
750.
not new. It has been in there. That's the city match dollars. And you want to speak to that a little bit more? Fontaine.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. So that's the Fontaine Streetscape project. That is a VDOT funded program. As we're working through our more or less our reboot to that particular portfolio, we've been able to get that project fully funded. It is moving forward. The university has participated in making that possible. So we will begin to see some work coming forward on that particular project.
Okay.
And,
All right. I'll reserve the rest of my questions till later. Thank you for that.
is my understanding correct that for the Fontaine project, that was almost like a reallocation of the commitment that had existed for the West Main streetscape?
That's what brings it in line, but the $5 million that was allocated for West Main is actually going to go to Emmett Street.
Okay.
It prevents us from having to acquire the right-of-way. We will use the easement instead. And then the surplus that was allocated for Emmett will move to Fontaine. So together, it all made it possible.
And it kind
That's
of,
the weaving that I've been doing that I referred to before.
and it got up to that 5 million.
Yes.
Well, that's very good to hear, because there was a lot of concern that that commitment would just disappear from you guys.
Yes.
So it's very good to hear.
And we will receive half of it next month.
Great. Okay, other questions? Carry on.
All right, so we're gonna, I think it's one of the, I don't remember if it was last week or the prior work session, there were some questions around the LED streetlight project. So I'm gonna pause, and we have Ms. Rittervolt, who is gonna join us remotely and talk to you about this a little bit.
Great.
Hi, good evening, Council. I appreciate the opportunity to present this project to you for your consideration. The LED streetlight conversion project was identified as an opportunity to save energy, to reduce emissions, and to reduce utility costs. And it's identified as a key action in our recently adopted 2023 Climate Action Plan. The total cost of the project is $600,000, and it is contemplated to be funded out of the CIP contingency fund. And I'll let Chrissy speak more to that after this. But we've been tracking this opportunity and have been aware of strong community and elected interest in LED streetlight conversion for over a decade. The city of Charlottesville has about 3,900 Dominion-owned streetlights for which we receive a monthly bill. The project that we are talking about expedites the conversion process that Dominion currently has in place, which essentially contemplates upgrading fixtures as they fail. But if we are able to pursue this expedited process, it is our expectation that we can tackle these nearly 4,000 streetlights in a 3-year timeline and have, in fact, a 4-year payback. And that payback is through the reductions in the monthly bills and then savings, monthly savings ongoing after that. The streetlight conversion project will essentially change out the older lighting technology, which consists of high pressure sodium and mercury vapor bulbs, to the energy efficiency light emitting diode, or LED technology. In terms of what this does for our climate goals, the 2019 inventory data presents the street light emissions as 967 metric tons of CO2 equivalents. So that's climate speak for the amount of emissions associated with the energy used by those streetlights. And that makes up 5% of the municipal sector of the overall community emissions. The outcomes of the project include increased reliability. This technology has a much longer lifespan than the current or traditional technology, cost savings, energy savings, and then in fact we can project a greenhouse gas reduction of about 75% from the current source. So while that may not be an enormous amount, it is a very accessible and a discrete and a quantifiable and frankly a project with a payback that we feel strongly would be a good early project to get off our to-do list. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions, council?
Just to,
I think it's fantastic.
yeah, I mean, it seems like a no-brainer. I guess, so it's Dominion that will be doing all the work, correct?
They will be, yeah, and our office will be doing the exciting task of coordinating, collaborating, logistics management, communicating. There will be a lot of moving parts and pieces. We are fortunate to have a couple of other localities in Virginia that either have recently completed or are at the tail end of this same project. And we're meeting with them and we'll get lessons learned from them. So hopefully we can perhaps skip some of the pain points.
Mm-hmm. And it's not the most important thing. The only concern I've heard from people is that the LED lights can be too bright, or like the color can cause like a disruption if it's right near someone's home. Is that something you feel like we're able to kind of be ready for and mitigate?
Well, I mean, it's interesting you bring that up because one of the things we've heard is that the substitute that Dominion may propose for a particular fixture may not is often over bright.
Right.
And so we've done some work to try to find some more localized sort of crosswalk opportunities. And one of our colleagues in another community worked with a consultant similarly to try to identify the best alternate fixture for certain settings. And in terms of brightness, there are also shields that can be installed as part of the system. In addition to the couple of outcomes I said, there is also some lighting quality. To your point, if we pick the right kind of light for the right setting, there's some opportunities to improve lighting quality, safety, improvements in terms of dark sky. And we can even go so far as say there are some opportunities to have improved conditions that support habitat for things like pollinators. And there's a lot of benefits to improved lighting.
Yeah, yeah, that would be, obviously great to pursue in conjunction with this. But that's all I had, and again, kind of seems like a no-brainer for quick action for the climate action plan.
And let me just add, I have been a great fan of the idea of LED streetlights since I ran for office 4 years ago, and that was one of the things I talked about a lot. And we were always being told, oh no, there are various reasons we can't do it, and I'm glad we're finding a way to do it. So, thank you.
Thank you.
So, as Crystal mentioned, we, as staff, we are recommending that if council would like to go forward with this project's not currently in the CIP, but we do have a potential source, which is the CIP contingency. And so with that, I took the liberty of knowing that the next question might be, well, how much do we have in the contingency? So I've provided you with a multi-year summary, and I wanted to talk through this because I did want to highlight how we are using the contingency and why we are where we are. If you'll notice in the proposed CIP, in the revenue section, you'll see across all 5 years, there are amounts from the contingency that we are using to balance the CIP. And at this moment in time, we have about $20 million there, which is a lot of money. And how did we get there? Historically, our CIP contingency balance has been anywhere from $500,000 to $600,000 to usually in the $2 to $3 million range. As you know, part of our financial policy is that any surplus at the end of the year automatically goes to the CIP unless council wishes to allocate some of that to go elsewhere. So that's how the contingency account receives funds. Couple of anomalies that have happened. FY20, if you look at the end of FY20, we had $2.4 million in the contingency account. I'm going to call that sort of our average balance. We closed out that FY20 with a surplus of $3.9 million, which got us to about $5.6 million, and then we hit COVID. And if you will recall, part of our strategy to make it through the pandemic was that we did not cash fund any projects in the CIP that year, and instead we withheld those dollars in a COVID reserve. When we closed FY21, we did not need those funds, and so as part of the year-end appropriation, those dollars were put back in. That was $6.7 million. Which got us to $11 million. Skipping to the 23 budget, when council was considering the CIP and other things, if you recall, there was a decision made to raise the real estate tax, and we went through a spreadsheet exercise, and there was about $1.9 million left over. That money was put in the CIP at council's wish, knowing that you were going to have increased needs coming up. So that added to that. Mm-hmm. In addition, we finished FY22 with a large surplus. Again, that was attributed to half a year of an unexpected tax increase and a half a year of a assessment increase that was higher than we anticipated. In addition, the schools closed out their year. They had some gain sharing funds, which they have passed along to the city. We'll talk about this in a little more detail with the Beaufort project, but the gain sharing agreement is basically anything that's left, they keep a small portion, and then what is calculated as the gain share, 50% comes back to the city, and the schools can keep a portion of that. All of that came back to the city, and that was put in the CIP to help offset some of the increased inflationary costs on the Beaufort project. So all of those things, I sort of highlighted the big numbers here of how we got to 20 million, and that sits in the contingency account at this moment. But if you consider this in light of our 5-year plan, the 24 through 28, we have started to program some of that back out. So the FY24 CIP uses 6.9 million of that, as well as the school gain sharing funds to help, and most of that was allocated to help buy down the inflationary increases on the Beaufort, or the inflationary increases we thought we had at that point on the Beaufort project. We also have used a small amount in 25, 26, 27, and 28. So essentially what this does is it allows us to continue to add the projects without having to necessarily bond them all. So if you look at the CIP, you'll see that in most years we have many more bondable projects than we anticipate than we've programmed for bond sales. We get good points for that. It's always better to pay for it as you go in a lot of cases. And so this was a strategy that we have employed to try to balance the CIP. Of course, it's at the discretion of council if you'd like to do something different. But even with that, taking the $600,000 out for the LED streetlight project, we also have applied for a grant through the Virginia Department of Emergency Management to supply some generators for emergency shelters and other city buildings. That would, if we get that, would require about a $300,000 match, which we've set aside. That would still leave council with about $7.9 million to allocate at any point. Doesn't have to be done now, but it does give you some cushion going forward as new projects come up and as things, appear that you would like to fund. This gives you some flexibility. And again, the contingency fund, if there are surpluses in the general fund, that would continue to be replenished.
Okay.
So I guess, just to help me kind of think about it, we've put a lot more into it to try to do some planning ahead of time for how to afford school reconfiguration and housing commitments, and we're able to do that. And it's, with those commitments at 7.8, should we be thinking about that more like this is a pool of money for new projects, or should we be thinking about, with inflation cost increases, that this is a cushion in case costs go up? I'm just like, what is your sense of sort of like how easily that 7.8 could go away with inflation?
I don't think, I'm looking at Mr. Goddard too, who, there remains flexibility. I don't think inflation will eat all of that
Okay.
up. So there may be room for, to consider some new projects.
Mm-hmm.
Is that fair, Mike?
You might want to talk more about this after I'm done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The picture becomes a lot clearer once you see the next.
Right, and it's not necessarily inflation. I'm thinking about just, cost increase, supply, issues and things. It just went up, because I remember we were, looking at the school project, and we were, trying to, we couldn't go up to the amount that we wanted to, but by time, and the cost increase, it was that amount anyway, so, a few more $1 million. So anyway, I just would be a little bit more conservative with that, because I think that, I think maybe for some smaller projects, we'd definitely still leave it as a cushion.
And we're gonna talk about that.
Okay.
And I would also just add, and then great segue, we'll turn it over to Mr. Goddard, but, you know, this is a way for council to have an opportunity to consider things that come up during the year. You have a pretty aggressive 5-year plan, that is fully funded if you accept the proposed CIP as is, and this gives you some flexibility to consider other options as well as they come along. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Goddard to talk about the Buford project.
Good evening. Do I have to do anything to make this work, or is it?
Is the green, is
It's
the
a-
green
it's
light?
There's a
green.
green
It's green.
talking man.
Then you're
So I
good.
think we're good. Good evening, council. Thank you for having me. As Christy said, I'm here to talk about the Buford project. I will contextualize what I'm about to say by saying that we in our office, as well as VMDO and their sub-consultants, have worked very hard to get this project designed to the point where we could bid it and have real numbers for you, and we do. So it's not all good news, but it's not terrible news. And so I'm going to kind of run through what we know now. The project bid about 2 weeks ago. The bids came in, and we have a low bidder, as well as some additive bid items that they've given us prices for. So I'm going to kind of try and put this all in a swallowable form, but it's a lot. So here we go. What you see on the screen is our available bid options and their prices. So in the first column, construction costs, these are the actual bid values that came in from our low bidder. For base bid only, base bid with additive bid item 2, don't worry about these. I'm going to go into excruciating detail about what each of these are. 2, 2 and 3, 1, 2, and 3. So first column is the total construction cost. I wouldn't pay much attention to that number because it's only so meaningful. Second column is our total project cost if you accept that. So total project cost will include the construction costs as well as our soft costs, design fees, that sort of thing. And most of those, I will say, are already baked into the project, and a lot of them are already spent. Then there are things like furniture, fixtures, and that sort of thing. Also, I have some contingency built into that so that I don't put us in a jam and come asking for money later if things get hairy. So the third column is kind of the important bit. We have already talked about the fact that there's been a $5.5 million commitment in previous fiscal years to this project. There has also been, in the draft CIP, approximately a $72 million commitment to the project. That $72 million commitment is not going to get us to our base bid or any other version of this project as it stands right now. What will get us to base bid is 78.3 approximately million dollars. So that's the fiscal year 24 addition that will require to do the base bid. And that's none of the additive bid items. So you see a little key at the bottom about what the ABIs are, but I'll go ahead and move forward because there's some more detailed information coming up. So this is alternate 2. And I'm taking these, they're not in numerical order because I've taken the liberty of sort of putting them in what I think is a logical sequential order that we might want to accept them. You, of course, can make your own decisions, but here it is. So ad bid 2 is the parking areas and basketball courts next to the gymnasium. And that the important thing about this ad bid is that it adds ADA access to the gymnasiums, and it gets us up to our base parking number that we really think we need for this school. So you'll see another chart later where it says not recommended without this one. I really think this is worth going ahead and purchasing. I think it was $423,000 if memory serves for that ad bid. So that's that one. I think that one's pretty simple. Go on to the next one. Ad bid 3 is the dining terrace. This is off the back, well, it depends on which way you're facing, but in my mind, the back of the dining area of Buford, between the dining area of the main building and the gym section of that building. It's very nice. It provides some accessibility access down to the lawn. I consider it less important than ad bid 2. Its memory will have to serve me again, but I think it was $480-something thousand for this ad bid. So go to the next one. This is the big one. This is the performing arts wing. So this is the part that we heard earlier had not been included in our original plans for the project, but we did go ahead and design it because I think it's important to have a number. There's also one important element of this that I think is really worth consideration, which is the connection between the auditorium building and the main building. You see a little arrow on the right-hand image saying connected campus. If we don't accept this, and if we don't do anything else about it, which there's a lot of game left to play, then those two buildings will be disconnected and our campus won't be completely closed, which was one of the goals of the project for security matters. There are also a bunch of classrooms. We're adding 6 classrooms. If we do this part of the project, some energy savings by modernizing the building envelope and making it fully ADA accessible, expanding the stage, which is a little tight right now, and that's about it. So that is ad bid 1, and again, memory, this one is expensive, relatively speaking. It's 6.7, I want to say, but the documents will have it on the next slide, so you can see it there, or the one after this. And then the final one, alternate 4, is the community garden. This is part of the city schoolyard garden program. There's currently a garden at Buford that we're going to have to demolish in order to do our construction project. I put this one last, not because I think it's the least important thing to do, but because I think we can do it other ways. I've also tried to take value into consideration by ranking these. So this is a difficult part of the project to quantify for a contractor because there's a lot of sort of movement of existing pieces and rebuilding things that are hard to design or put your arms around. So I think that based on the bid that we got on this part, we could do it more cheaply ourselves, and I think we can find the money for that in other ways.
Could you just explain what some of those other ways would be?
I would imagine that we can find money in one of our lump sums for it. I think I'm not comfortable with the number that we got from the contractor for the reasons I stated, but I think we can do it more cheaply, and if we can probably find the money.
Mm-hmm.
And that contractor number was what?
198.
But I know, the future is impossible to predict. Would you say you feel pretty confident this would be able to get done?
Considering the fact that my staff is going to have to put so much effort into doing this project, thus diverting us from doing other projects that will be in the lump sum, yeah, I think we can pretty much guarantee we'll find a way on this one.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we're committed to that. I think it's an important program. We all agree on that. Like I said, it's not last because we don't care. It's last because I think there are better ways to do this. So here's that slide I promised with all the particulars. And you want to go ahead and jump back in, Chrissy, or do you want me to carry on a bit?
So I will just bring us up to where we are at this moment. If you will recall, in FY23, we were at a total of 71.8, as Mr. Rogers referenced. I think we ended our budget development last year with a construction cost of $68.8 million. And then we had the design dollars in the prior year, so we were at 71.8. When we were working on the budget for this year, of course, that was our starting point, and I think FD had gotten some estimates based on what we thought inflation might be, and we had increased that, hedging our bets that we would be able to offset all of that. So we added another 6.5 million, which got us to the $72 million number that is currently in the proposed CIP for '24, which got us to a total of 78.3 is what we have available for this project right now. And then I can let you talk about the options.
So, and I want to also talk a bit about this sort of escalation situation that we found ourselves in, just to bring everybody up to speed on the sort of the state of the industry. We have seen double-digit inflation for each of the last 2 years, so it depends on who you ask, but 12-ish% for each of the past years. When you start to accumulate those numbers, it gets out of hand. That means a few things. It means for us, it's very difficult for us to have told you a year ago or 2 years ago exactly what this project was going to cost. It also means that contractors are having to use a crystal ball to figure out what they should bid this project at. So if I own a construction company and I know that there's been double-digit inflation for each of the last 2 years, and I'm going to be doing a 3-year project, the last year of that project is about 2 years out, and I have to bet my company's well-being on being right about that inflationary number. So, and I don't say this because we should accept whatever comes. What I'm saying is that it has been incredibly difficult for us to pin down what that number is going to be, because they want to be competitive on the one hand, but they also don't want to lose their shirt on the other. So that all said, we now have real numbers. We've been playing poker against time, and everybody's now shown their cards. These are real numbers. So we don't have to talk about what's going to happen inflationarily in the next year or 2 years or 3 years, because right now, barring a few minor things, we really have a very good idea of what this project is going to cost in real dollars. So with that, I come hat in hand, ready to ask for some more money. So as I mentioned, base bid is a $83.8 million project. Option 2 is 84, and it goes up from there, as you can see. And that's accumulating all of the ad bids as you go down. We can pick and choose if council doesn't want to entertain, say for instance, parking lot, or they don't want to entertain, any part of it. It's up to us to decide what we want. But what I will say is that I'm really hoping to leave here with some level of clarity as to how we should proceed, because we have a contractor who has bid the project. They're waiting. They're probably watching this right now to see what we're going to do and what we want to start writing a contract for. I don't have to sign that contract tomorrow, but we do need to start moving the contract if we're going to build this thing. So the more we can do to get some clarity from you all today, the better.
So if I'm reading the numbers correctly, if we have 78 million.
Yeah, so we'll skip ahead a little bit. We have 78.3 is where we are.
Yes.
So if we take a look at any of the options, let's just say if we went with option 2, that's the base bid plus the parking lot, we'd need about $6 million to cover that. So we got on the phone, we've talked to schools, we've tried to come up with some alternatives for how could we get there. Just as a reminder, schools did have a gain share for, I have the wrong year here, I apologize, FY22. That was a little over $1 million that is currently in the project, in the CIP, as well as a construction grant of 1.4. So there's $2.5 million already programmed. In addition, in working with school staff, they have $1.5 million in fund balance that they could contribute towards this project. That would be available right now. They anticipate gain share for 23 and 24. And that is a 50-50 split with the city and the schools. But those 2 years, based on those projected amounts and the fund balance amount, would get us to the $6 million additional funds that would be needed for the project.
And when you say the project, this is still without the auditorium.
That's correct.
That's-
That's just the base bid plus the
The
parking
parking.
lot.
Plus the
In the
parking.
scenario that she's laying out, yes.
Right.
Yeah. So with that scenario, it's using, you're able to identify funds to do option 2.
Right.
And so all the additional fund numbers are already factoring in that just previous slide?
This one?
Yes.
Yeah, so the one thing about the gain share though is that, the fund balance we could get now, so we'd have that in 24. The gain share for 23 and 24 don't actually happen and aren't really confirmed until the year closes and the books close. So those funds would come in late 24 and late 25. But that's also consistent with the drawdown that we have planned and the debt issuance that we have planned based on the project drawdowns as well.
Ms. Hamel, can you go back to the slide just before?
Sure.
Mr. Mayor, are you interested in a conversation now about how we feel about this, or you want to do that later, or what?
I'd say let's go ahead and have the conversation now. We've got the slides up.
Yeah, my own view, when we went through this conversation a year ago, we were all, I think very upfront and grown up about the fact that funds were already going to be tight to do the essentials of this project. And that was before, and that was a number of 71.8. And then, we're in an inflationary period and there's no way around it. And that it's unfortunate, but what that means is there's less appetite, there's less ability to do what we'd really like to do. So I guess my own view is that we should go with option 1. We're already 10% higher, or well, not quite 10%, but that already bakes in a escalation amount of $6 million. I can certainly appreciate the value and worth of the other things that are laid out, in particular the auditorium, but I personally don't think it's responsible to do that at this juncture. I mean, if it's possible to spin that off as a second project, you've got the design done, maybe we come back and revisit that in a few years. Maybe there's some local funds that are available to fund that particular piece, but my view is that we do option 1.
So the question I had, I'm trying to figure out, do we have a picture or any explanation of the line item for schoolyard garden for $198,000? Is there something here that I'm not seeing?
It's not so much a picture as the plan that's up on the screen there.
Schematic right here.
So, and what this is essentially showing is the difference between what we get with base bid and what we get with a fully built-out garden. We didn't render this, but it's, I think you can get the gist of it. Basically, with the base bid, we get a place to put the garden,
Yeah.
and they will move the essential elements that we're saving into position, and then it's up to us to supply the garden beds, the, greenhouses, what have you.
Okay, so alternate 4. I see, okay.
So Mike, but you did say that this is something that you and your staff could get done.
Yes, I would say as much as I can say I'm committed to it as I can without someone else telling me otherwise, I would say yes. That's
But it's
definitely
not,
doable.
It's not free. It's not 198,000, but it's some amount.
Yeah, I mean, the value of the dollar may change dramatically, but I would say $100,000 would probably get this project done to everyone's satisfaction. And we have that probably available in our lump sums.
So is the line item for outdoor classroom, does that correspond to the dining terrace?
Yes. That's this slide.
Okay. I didn't understand that dining terrace equated to outdoor classroom, okay.
It serves many purposes, as does any good space, right?
So, where I am, add on this is that, can you go back, I guess, when, the one that shows
The money.
this one, yeah.
This one?
No, the previous one, I'm sorry.
Right there,
This one.
right there. No, the other one.
Oh, this one?
Yeah. The other number, well, yeah.
The other one.
So,
The other one.
I think that where I am is that I'm at option 3. I mean, because, you know, I think we definitely need to do the ADA access if we're gonna, you know, parking there is really, I was just there last weekend for an event, and ADA parking there is not good the way it is, and I wish we could make the jump to, and so I just wanna make sure I understand that at this point, it's, you know, they're not gonna come back and say, well, we discovered something under the ground and it's gonna be an extra $2 million or whatever.
We do not know that they won't do that, but that's what we carry contingency for, and that's baked into these numbers.
Yeah,
Barring,
yeah.
you can always find something,
Yeah.
but barring crazy calamity, we're covered.
Yeah. I wish we could do the performing arts, and I just think that's just too big of a jump, you know, with the funds, but I think that $1 million, you know, for the parking and the classroom essentially, that's, you know, while things already kind of torn up out there, we can, I can see us doing those. I'm hoping that the fundraising arm of the school can work to get someone to sponsor this Performing Arts Center, maybe name it after someone, but you know, whoever you know does the work on that. But I can't see the jump with that right now. That's kind of where I am with it.
Thoughts, Michael?
Sure. I mean, it's difficult. I mean, you know, we're always in a difficult position of having, you know, a limited budget and funds, and, you know, this hasn't been easy, but we've been able to remain committed to it, canceling West Main Streetscape, parking garage, a tax increase, the creativity you all have had in terms of putting money in the contingency fund and our surpluses to find a way to actually get this done. I think I'm in a similar place as Vice Mayor Wade in terms of option 3. I think, you know, there's a little bit of extra cost, but if you're looking at the affordability within our CIP budget, I don't see that necessarily being like make or break in terms of our ability to kind of swallow this cost. You know, with inflation and supply chain issues, already having brought up the base cost that we had, you know, found a way to get to last budget cycle. But that's where I kind of am now, and it is, you know, it's unfortunate, but, you know, we've got a constrained budget with inflation on every project and a lot of other big investments we're already committed to, and that's just a tough position to be in, but that's kind of my thinking on it now.
I'm inclined to go with option 3 also, but I want to point out a couple of things I think are true. One is that it looks like, I mean, as we look at the option for the Performing Arts Wing, the first question is, with the connected campus, are we getting to the point of, to the place of sufficient security of the facility that, I mean, one of the reasons we were contemplating this in the first place was because the open campus design in an era of school shootings is just an absolutely unacceptable design these days. And the question is, can we tolerate a situation where we're almost a closed campus? It's sort of like being almost pregnant, a little bit pregnant. And so that concerns me. The fact that this also would be it is mentioned on this slide that the redoing of the performing arts wing makes the school fully ADA accessible, or at least that portion of it fully ADA accessible. And I think that that's an interest that we have shortchanged in many ways and regarded as a luxury rather than as just one of the things that we ought to be accepting as the cost of doing business. The other piece to it, and I'm just wondering where we've got the community garden is basically right next to, or is right next to it and would be built out right next to the Performing Arts Center. And when we talk about a community garden, I mean, literally, is that members of the community coming in at various points, or is it specifically
Typically
the
not.
Buford community, or how are we
that's a-
defining community here?
Yeah, that's basically the Buford community. So the way that the program, and I'm not an expert on it, but my kids take part, and essentially the program is teaching kids about foodways, gardening,
Okay.
that sort of thing. So it's really mostly a school-centric program. It's not like the community gardens that are all over town that anybody can come and tend to
Okay,
patch.
okay.
It's
Because
not
I
that
was gonna say,
specific.
if we're gonna have something like that where we are actually kind of inviting or welcoming other people other than school community people to come to a spot that is right next to the only insecure spot in the schools, that would be really a mistake. Okay. So, I mean, if there were a way that we could get this, we could get the $6.9 million to do it, I would be all in favor of doing it. I don't know, just my general sense of looking through everything is that we don't have $6.9 million worth of flexibility in our capital account, particularly if we're going to have any ability to do a number of things that we expect will come up in the next year or so.
But you just approved submittal of a grant application by
Yeah.
school system.
When
That
will we
could-
likely hear on that, do you know?
I don't know. Do you know?
Ms. Torres, who knows?
So the application is due tomorrow.
Good thing we approved it tonight.
Yes, very, very good. And the information that Ms. Powell got from talking to contacts at the VDOE was that they were looking to do this very quickly, and we would hear as soon as mid-April, which is a matter of weeks.
Wow.
I think they're trying to get their funding together before the fiscal year starts.
Mhm.
And you said if we were successful in that grant for the Buford project, it would be equivalent to about 10 mil, or
7 to 8.
7 to 8.
7 to 8.
10%, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I don't know how
build the
to.
auditorium.
Right, I mean, it's a good point, and I don't know how to game that out, is both that grant and then perhaps against my better judgment, I remain cautiously optimistic that at some point, the state government is at least going to allow localities to do the sales tax or spend more money on schools statewide, although history shows we shouldn't be too optimistic about that. But, yeah.
Mr. Mayor, we have two elected school board members here. They may want to chime in. I don't know. Do you have anything to add?
We do, sir, if it's allowed.
Happy to hear from you.
Yeah, as soon as Mr. Gunner.
Okay. Could I just ask one other question particularly about the grant that we're applying for? If it's 10% of the project cost, if we want to play a little gamesmanship, we would want to approve the auditorium to jump up and basically, that would give us another 10% of $7 million is $700,000 more.
That is one way to play it, yeah. Well, and while we're talking about other funds, we are also trying to grab some IRA funds by certain machinations to support our geothermal heating and cooling system that's going into the school. We believe that we are going to be eligible for about somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 million worth of reimbursement at project conclusion. does us no good today, but, you know, there are federal funds starting to come in for these sorts of things, so I'll write you a blank check from the federal government, I guess.
Well, I guess the question is, could we say, yes, we are going to approve the auditorium and basically option 4 minus the garden that we would pay for ourselves? We could approve that, and within the next month or so, we would know whether we would be getting that grant. And if we don't get the grant, just pull back on that.
You could approve it contingent upon receipt of the grant.
So we have to have a balanced budget, so we
Right.
have to have a source
Right.
Mhm.
for that at this point.
Okay.
What would the contract, the bidder say about something like that? Would they want concrete?
I suspect that they would be amenable. I mean, I can't speak for them. They're they don't work for the city. But to my thinking, this is not a part of the project that's for immediate construction. There's a whole phase ahead of that work. So, barring any major financial calamity, I would imagine that it would be in their best interest to hold that cost for as long as they could. So, you know, it's certainly a question worth asking, and I would think, get a good answer on it.
Well, we're probably only
Mr.
talking
Goddard?
about 30 days, right? We would know the answer within the next 30 days.
I've learned never to trust schedules that people give me, but yeah, I think
For
that's what we're
60
talking
days
about.
anyway. but
Something like that, yeah.
Whoever is doing this building would not likely make irrevocable decisions in the next 30 to 60 days.
We could counsel them not to.
Yeah.
And,
So, Mr. Goddard, would you, I mean, how would this work? Would you basically write a contract for the total 91.8 and then do a deductive change order if it didn't work out for that part of the scope? Or would you proceed in the other direction and write a contract for less than that and then add on a additive change order? Or would you structure it some other way?
I would probably go the first of your options. You're asking me to lay out everything, you know, all my top secrets here publicly. But yeah, I think I would probably do a deduct. That's probably the cleanest way to do it from my perspective, as long as we had good schedules of values and an agreement that everything would be backed out at full value, then yeah.
Uh-huh.
And that
Okay.
would be written into the contract?
It would have to be, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that certainly gives us more flexibility. You know, even if this one grant didn't work out, if there's more money that is available from the state, I was just listening to Senator Deeds today, that there may still be some other options for the 1% sales tax. I don't know if anyone else has heard any more about that, but I guess the state won't really finish its budget until May or June, it sounds like. So if you were to write a contract for that whole amount and then we did a deductive change order, then that gives us flexibility.
Right.
Okay. All right.
I will proceed.
So
Shall we
I-
hear from the school board members who are here? Obviously, we're not taking a vote at this point, so it doesn't really matter, but you're here and we would like to hear from you.
I'm gonna let her start, but we do have some other handouts.
Oh, and
No, I think first we just want to publicly reiterate our thanks for your support that you've voiced for this project, and we're eager to move, from talking about this into actually breaking ground and into action. And just also want to reiterate that, we're not just creating a new space to continue doing the same thing. We're talking about fundamentally changing the way that we address the middle grades in this community by eliminating some really detrimental transition points. There was some talk tonight about connected campus and how that leads to safer schools, and certainly that's a huge piece of the physical safety of our campuses. But the bigger objective for us is, we're talking about the middle school reconfiguration or K-Tech, is about creating spaces where kids are really invested in what they're doing and creating pathways for their future. In my opinion, that is a much more surefire way to having safer schools than simply connecting them, although both are certainly important. Really creating those opportunities for students to engage in their learning and what they're doing. This project is so long awaited and overdue, and we know that the costs aren't going to go down if we wait to do these things. It's just not going to become cheaper. So as we grapple with the really heavy realities that our community is facing, fully investing in this project is actual action that we can take now to positively impact our young people in our communities. So again, thank you for your consideration and kind of creative brain think here as we try to make this move forward. And I know Ms. Torres has some more specific notes on some funding ideas.
Yeah, so again, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Goddard, for your presentation. And specifically in the handout that I provided you all, lays out a little bit about the add-ons, or more specifically about the add-ons that Mr. Goddard spoke to. And I do want to thank his team, VMDO, Ms. Hamill, and I know you've spent a lot of time meeting and talking to school, some of our staff about what we can do and how we can fund some of these. But again, appreciation for all of you for getting us to this point. So I think it's huge. I think, add-on number 3, which was that terraced outdoor classroom, some of the conversations that have happened and options to fund that, again, specifically, Charlottesville City Schools is scheduled to send $475,000 from a grant, from an HVAC grant to offset 50% of HVAC CIP costs for fiscal year 2023. And I apologize, Ms. Hamill, if that was captured in there.
It's not.
So we request that CIP dollars originally budgeted that are now not needed to support these fiscal year 23 HVAC projects be redirected to offset the $448,000 cost of add-on item number 3. So again, this is all there, and we hoped that this would help for you guys to see this on paper.
Do we know what because CIP dollars originally budgeted, now not needed, what that amount is?
We have $750,000 recurring budget for school HVAC.
Right.
And this 470, is it 475? 475 is just a grant that they have that would offset those costs, a one-time offset.
Okay, so that's okay. So basically, we're talking about taking that 475 and using 90% of it, 95% of it on this. Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. Mr. Goddard already spoke to the garden and how, some ideas about how that could be funded. The number 2, the walking track, that definitely was one that we are really drawing a blank here. Prioritizing, as again, this is accessibility and parking. So in a lot of these things, the accessibility piece, as Mayor Snook said, is crucial. Everybody needs to be able to access everything related to a project like this, not just the kids, parents, grandparents, anybody who wants to get to those buildings and to those spaces. Again, back to the big one, which was the Fine Arts Building. And as Ms. Hamill spoke and Mr. Goddard spoke, fingers crossed, and thank you, Mayor Snook and council for signing off on that letter and supporting us in that grant. So if we get that, that's potentially $8.5 million that we could get. I guess the question is, and if we want to be realistic, is what if we don't get that, right? That's a huge piece of that building. It's a huge part of what our students can experience throughout all of their years in Charlottesville City Schools, but here at Buford too, that fine arts program, and that's an area that we know that this community has really prioritized. I believe there has been talk, and it is on your handout, and Mr. Goddard kind of alluded to this a little bit, that with contract negotiations with our contractor, we do plan to request a provision to hold the pricing for that item. So, and again, if the grant doesn't happen,
then what we do is we come back and we reach out to other funding sources, to the community who might pitch in, but I do think there are other options that we can turn to help with that funding. Again, when we think about that building and why it's so important to do it, it's a 1965 building. We will be adding or doubling the number of students at Buford. And without that add-on item, we're keeping 2 music rooms in that 1965 building. So, it's going to be it's already makeshift, and we want to modernize it and allow our students to have that quality programming there. Again, points were made about the open campus, and having that item or that add-on will allow us to have a secure building. Proceeding with this project enables Charlottesville City Schools to eliminate that open campus, but only if that building B in the middle school is included in the scope. So we all are asking that you consider that and approve that going forward. Everyone involved has collaborated and been so resourceful in preparing us and getting us to this point. It's been, as Mr. Wade knows, and if Ms. Puryear was here, this has been, Mr. Snow, it's been 20 years that we've been talking about this in different iterations, and we were so close. And again, we appreciate your support and what you've done to help us get here. And I think that's all I have for now. If you have any other specific questions, but I hope that this handout and this information helps address some options to cover the costs of those add-ons. So thank you.
Thank you. So council, after doing our little head count, but before we started thinking about this grant, has the thinking about the grant caused anybody to have some additional thoughts or different thoughts?
Well, I think, oh, go ahead.
Before you do that, Ms. Hamill, if we have an obligation to deliver a balanced budget for the CIP. If we increase the costs to include the auditorium, that would be to the 93. Mm-hmm. And the basis of doing so is including the anticipated revenue from a grant that has not been approved. Is that in fact a balanced budget?
That would not be my recommendation. If council wishes to approve that full budget, I would probably suggest that you commit the rest of your contingency or bond funds, and we're going to talk about that capacity a little bit, and then use the grant as a, yay, we got this and now we can do something else. But I think you because there is a risk that you might not get it, I think you have, if you're going to approve it, I think you should approve a solid plan to pay for it. That would be my recommendation.
Is there any way to approve contingent on receiving the grant in any way? Because maybe, the bonding, it solves the issue, but I know with contingency, there are some things we haven't even touched on yet in terms of the acquisition of KTEC and inflation cost increases for existing projects and other things.
I think you could add language that basically says, we're approving this, we're paying for it this way, should we receive the grant, that will be returned to the CIP, and then you would just reshuffle.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause to answer
But basically, what we're doing when we do that is we're essentially saying the city stands behind a $91.8 million project.
That's correct.
And if the grant doesn't come through, which, I don't know why, I don't have any reason to believe that it will or won't. I mean, I certainly hope it will, but I just think we need to be clear-eyed about what we're saying. If we approach this from, okay, this is what we can afford, if we get a grant, then we'll do more perspective, then maybe that means Mr. Goddard needs to restructure what he's going to do and do this in sort of an added to change order sort of way of doing it versus a deductive. I'll just say that for myself, even though the points made about the that extra building and particularly about connecting it and so forth certainly have a lot of merit. Again, we go back a year to where we were and how the numbers have. A year ago, we weren't even sure we were going to be able to do this project at all, and we found a way to move forward, creatively, and. 10% of this is construction escalation, which is outside of anyone's control. I can appreciate the fact that when you're 85 or 90% of the way there to what you really want, it's like, well, let's go ahead and finish this. But in terms of like, I think, being consistent with, at least for me, what I said a year ago, I can't support that other building at this point. So.
Well, should we go ahead and hear the rest of
Sure.
the presentation and then circle back?
Yep. 'Cause there's some good news, and then we'll keep going.
It ain't that good.
So I want to talk about, I'm gonna try to spare you from the ugly debt table. And so I tried to look at this a little bit differently this time. And earlier today when I was working on this, I called this debt capacity, but now when I look at it, it's probably better, basically what this graph is showing you is what has our 9% or our 10% target look like over time. It also compares sort of the growth of the general fund budget. So I know that, as Councilor Pinkston just mentioned, and last week we talked about the fact that at one point in time we were talking about we started at 50 million and we didn't know we could get that in. When we started those conversations, that was in 19 and 20, and the general fund budget was at $188 million. We're now at almost $227 million. So as that number continues to grow, so does our capacity. So even with this 5-year CIP that we've put forward to look at $130 million worth of bonds, we're nowhere near our 10%. We're also not really near our 9%. We're closer to the 6% mark. So capacity is not our issue. And I played around with some numbers, and again, this is as I like to tell Mr. Rogers, don't hang on this number, but I got us to about a capacity of about another $250 million before we get to 10%, based on our current general fund budget. So capacity is not our problem. But what is our problem is figuring out how we pay for that. So, we can issue debt all day long, but it's not free. We have to make that payment. And so I took a look at the 5-year CIP as laid out. It includes the debt service payment. It spreads out the cost of the project. Now, I'm using, admittedly, this debt service that's in here for the school project is based on where we were in 23. I didn't change it. It's, it's not going to be that material for the story I'm trying to tell here. But essentially, our debt service payment in 24 is projected to be at about $13.7 million. By the time we get to 2028, we're at $20.7 million. So as we look at that, overly simplifying this, forgetting about the debt service fund balance that we have and all these gyrations that we go through, if you look at this chart here, you can see that historically and in most years, our debt service payment or our transfer from the general fund is pretty static, very little change. So if you were to just kind of take a snapshot at 2024, if our annual debt service payment was 13.7, if we looked at the general fund, and we have historically used a growth rate of about 1.5%, that change from on the debt service payment from 23 to 24 is about $500,000. that would eat up about 3.8% of any new money in the general fund, just to cover your debt service payment. Moving on, you can see in 25, 26, 27, that's when we start to layer in the cost of the debt for the school project. Our debt service payment starts to climb. So we go from 13.7 up to, in 27, we're over $20 million. In each of those years, our debt service payment, which would be, you know, piece of the pie out of the general fund, would be roughly $2 million. If the general fund were to only grow 1.5%, that's about $3 million and some change. And so in each of those 3 years, the increase in your debt service payment would comprise, you know, anywhere from 60 to as much as 80% of that new growth in that one payment. So that means that, you know, what's left of that is all you have for anything new. So it's and then you can see in 28, we've pretty much now layered in all the new debt for the school project. So it starts to layer off, because in the projection we were considering we would just issue about $15 million, which is more our average. And so you see that the change in the debt service payment sort of levels off to about 5%. So quickly you can see that the impact of debt is manageable if you plan for it. Capacity, again, we could issue tons of debt, but we have to pay for it. And with each just sort of $10 million of debt that we issue, a good guideline, 20 years at about 3.5% interest, which we're going to sell in June. Interestingly enough, when we sold last year, we were, I should have looked this up, but I think we were around 1.5%. Sales now are about anywhere in the 3 to 3.5% range, which we did not change our projections, so our projections are still good with this. You know, it's the game of projections, and so we don't know what we don't know, but we take our best guess. And you know, looking at the CIP, we have allocated $129 million worth of bonds just in this snapshot over these 5 years. This assumes $156 million. So in this scenario, that would leave you about $26.6 million of what I'm going to call unassigned debt, based on just this snapshot of this 5 years of the debt plan. So I'm going to stop right there for a second. That was a
Ms.
lot.
Hamel, this number is what, is this the 72.8 that you gave us it's in our book for the school?
This table is actually built based on the debt when we were at 68.8, but I would offer that the difference in that on an annual basis for those few $1 million is not that material in your annual debt service payment. So this is slightly lower, but I wouldn't say it's materially lower.
Okay, but the number we're actually looking at, though, is a higher number based off the charts we saw earlier, or the options that we're talking about for the school.
For the school project, that's correct. But keep in mind that in the scenarios we've presented to you, we are not presenting to issue any additional debt than what was proposed in 23, because we've come up with the other sources that are not debt funds.
Got it. Thank you.
Anything on this before we go forward?
So will any of this impact the credit rating? I mean, I know it impacts it, but I'm talking in a negative way. I know if we get up towards the 250, but I know that's.
We are in a good position. As Ms. Hamill pointed out, we are at about 6% now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't see any action that's going to adversely affect our AAA credit rating. But I will say, and I always say this, the thing about debt is as you increase your debt payments, that crowds out something else in the budget that you need to, that you may want to do. You're gonna have to, that may mean $1 million in debt service is almost equivalent to one one cents on tax, and that means that's a number of employees that you can't hire. That's a number of dollars that you cannot contribute to affordable housing, etc. So we're very cautious about that. But what we pointed out here, we have capacity. What we have to be concerned about is our long-term affordability and the impact it has on our ability to keep up with the spending demands in the general fund, principally employee costs, cost of health benefits, those kinds of things.
So I'm gonna move on a little bit and kind of build on. I know one of the other things that I think Councilor Payne brought up last week was the fact of, are we being too conservative? And so again, I want to reiterate that is that our goal? Absolutely. It is our job to be responsible and to make recommendations that we feel like we are a sure thing to afford, and if we come out on the back end better, all the better, because then you can still add. So even if we're conservative on the front end, the way our policies are established, you get the money back on the back end once you know it's there, and then you have it. That's the $7 million that's sort of left in the contingency. But I do want to point out that so we are considering the 1.5% general fund growth on an annual basis, we have far surpassed that over the last few years. I promise you, at some point, we're not. I say this every year, and then every year it makes me a liar. But we are not going to maintain that. That's not going to be sustainable. So just looking at a history, and this is a chart you've seen before. I wanted to show you this because we're kind of on the other end. But if you go back to 2007 and right before the sort of 2008 crisis, you'll see that we were way up and then we dropped. And there is 1 year on this chart that's actually negative, and then there's some that are 2% or lower. So is 1.5 a good assumption? Who knows? We just don't know. And we have the complication with the pandemic. There's just no way to know how that works. So food for thought on that. Moving ahead, our team met as late as right after lunch today, and we have sharpened our pencil. We did go back and look at some things. Based on what we are seeing now, we do have some adjustments to revenue that are just under $2.2 million. Part of $100,000 on personal property. Penalty and interest, we expect to get about another $285, and I want to stress that that is not because we are charging more or that more people are in trouble. It's just because that's a percent, and so as the value of the bill is higher, then the penalty is actually higher, and we actually haven't changed that budget for years. We've maintained that level. So lodging tax and meals tax, I would say, is still booming. And so, again, one thing we did learn from COVID, they are extremely economically sensitive. And so while they are serving us well at this point, should things go south, who knows? But based on what we're seeing, we feel like these are conservative, and we wanted to bring these to your attention. So with that, I added a few things here that I've heard, and again, all of this is at council's discretion, but one thing we did talk about was the African American Heritage Center at Jefferson School. This amount actually would pay for an entire year of rent, which would get them through June
of 24.
And would give you more time to talk about that, but it would give them another year. Public defender, it has been our practice to fund them at the same percent as any COLA to city employees, so that's just the difference. I had them in at 4%, this gets them to 6%.
So what is that 1 point? Is that 1,700? Okay.
Yeah, so I had them in, it's basically just the change.
Okay.
Yeah. Voter registration, if you recall, there was a conversation about the fact that schools are working to change their names, and there was a request or a comment from council about the possibility of sending an additional notice once the name changes happen. That's at a cost of about $12,000, so I've added that here for consideration. And then the council strategic initiatives, again, this is totally up to council, but I had put in $150,000 for council for '24. That was prior to the $325 that we added for the year-end surplus. So one of the conversations we had was that if you wanted to do the Jefferson School, we could offset it with that $150. So I'm showing that here. That can come in, come out. Any of these are subject to your approval. That would leave about just under $2.2 million for consideration of other expenditures or reserve or whatever you'd like to do with that.
For the '24 budget.
I think our discussion on nonprofits would be fun.
Or nonprofits. So that's that piece. We also wanted to take an opportunity to share with you what we're seeing with '23. Again, the biggest thing here is that the real estate assessment that came in January was larger than we had anticipated last year at this time. And so we do get a half a year of that assessment increase, which is making up about $4.6 million of revenue that we had not anticipated. Personal property, that as well, we've talked a lot about the assessed values being historically high. That is looking at about a $1.8 million. Moving on down, we've talked about lodging and meals and sales. They both are performing better in this year, which also accounts for the increases that we're projecting for '24. So roughly $9.6 million of additional revenue that we are projecting that we had not accounted for previously. In addition, business and professional license, that's based on gross receipts. And so as people are recovering from the pandemic, those license fees are going up. State highway and state police protection, these two line items are a direct result of our timing versus the state budget timing. So for example, we will probably have these two lines next year at this time. Because I don't have updated numbers for what '24 really looks like. So this just represents what we actually are receiving from the state that we didn't know about last year at this time. And then interest rates have continued to rise, so we are looking for a little bit of an increase. So all this to say, as of this moment, it is based on our work with the revenue team, we feel like our revenue surplus will be just over $10 million for '23. And so that does not account for what we may see on the expenditure side. For other expenses, non-personnel, we are tracking. It looks to be right on target. We're in March. We're about 3/4 of the way through the year. We're in the 70-ish, 72-ish% of being spent. However, we do know we have a large number of vacancies, so we do anticipate some vacancy savings there. And those, expenses are a little bit harder because they're not cyclical, and so they're a little bit harder to project than the revenues. So it is anticipated we will have something more than 10.4 at the end of '23, but this is our best guess right now. And so just to reiterate too, this is a big number, and again, this is depending on your view, good news, bad news. It's not really the way we would like to think that we budget. We would like to be much closer and not have a large number like this, but we did want to tell you before the year ends so that you have this to consider. And as part of a process, very much like we did last year, what I would envision is that to kind of bring you back to our schedule, we have now, this has completed our third work session. We have a work session next week. Monday night, we will be having the first reading of the budget ordinance, which what will be before you is exactly what is proposed, without any changes at all. And that would now be up to council to make any amendments or suggestions, and then they would be reflected in the second reading. So on next Thursday, I think what we could do is bring out our handy dandy spreadsheet. We'll have 2 columns this year. One will be this $2.2 million that we have in '24, and then the other would be sort of this anticipated surplus for '23. Again, no final approvals. That's just to talk about what your wishes are, or as an opportunity for something to do. But that wouldn't actually materialize until November, December.
And that's one time
Correct.
expenditures.
Right.
Yeah, so.
Ms. Himmel, could I just ask a quick question to
Yes.
clarify? So the 10.6 is where you all are thinking we're going to end up bringing in more revenue than we thought. 10.4 rather,
10.4,
sorry.
Yes.
10.4. And it sounds like you're feeling like on the expenses side, where we come in is going to be pretty close to what you budgeted.
That's in non-personnel expenses. There will be a surplus in personnel expenses, and I would think that that's probably going to be in the 3 to 4 million range. Hard to say. We're still steadily filling positions, and some of that may be eaten up between now and the end of the fiscal year. But
so your sense is that on the expense side of this ledger, you may come in, say, $3 million, expend $3 million less than you had thought.
yes,
So that gives us
Don't hang on that number.
you're right.
understood, but we're talking
All
perhaps
caveats
it's
around it. And so to complete your next sentence, what we are saying is that council in November, December will have about probably $13.4 million to allocate for programs and projects in FY '24.
Or per
Thank you.
policy, that would go to the CIP.
Go to the,
do the same
right,
thing.
absolutely. As opposed to the 22 that we had last year.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. And that's where we come down to.
Well, that's extremely helpful, and really appreciate that you took the time to do that and present this information to us.
Okay. So what we hope on April 6th, that you have taken all of these numbers into consideration. You know what you have to work with. And as you consider how you want to allocate it, that you give us a message back in terms
Right.
of how you want to amend the budget.
So one question I wanted to ask is, and I could probably just send you a memo on it, but I want to state it up front because I think it's important publicly to state, is that I will reiterate what I have said before, that I really think we should be funding at a 100% level the drug court, therapeutic docket, and other things where we're proceeding on an MOU or some contract where other governmental entities are depending on it, where other governmental entities are chipping in 100%, and we apparently have decided in our arrogance that we will not. And I think that's wrong, and I think we should change it, and I'd like to know, not tonight necessarily, but when we get to April 6th, I would like to know what that amount would be.
Message received
And my
and
apologies,
understood.
I heard you say that last week and I forgot to put it on the list, so
Right.
Thank
we'll
you.
get there.
So, maybe what we're gonna do now is do the public hearing piece of it, and maybe we can have some further thoughts of ours after the public has spoken. First of all, is there anybody, the standard comments, If you are in the room and you would like to speak, that's fine. Just let us know. If you are on Zoom, you may select the raise hand option to be placed in the speaker queue. If you're joining by phone and wish to speak, please press *9. Is there anyone in person who would like to speak? Come forward, please. Identify yourself. Tell us where you live. And you'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, counselors, staff. Appreciate your time. Didn't catch all of the original part of the presentation. I did try to find it online beforehand, but I know sometimes there's last-minute things. I'm assuming it's going to be posted.
It will be tomorrow.
All right. I really want to appreciate, especially Ms. Hamill, who is always very conservative in her
State your name,
budget.
please.
Sorry, Chris Meyer,
I know who you
124
are, but-
Oak Lawn
yeah.
Court. Sorry, I did skip that, Mayor. Excuse me. And I'm glad to hear it sounds like we're $15 million have a surplus, and $10 million from we're expecting this year, plus $3 million in expense savings. We're not quite there yet, but and what I would like to say is, I think we were having concerns about capacity issues on debt limits last year too. I think around this time, especially when we were considering this, and what I'm hearing from Ms. Hamill too is there's plenty of debt capacity. What I also know is that from decades, we have not been making the necessary investments in our infrastructure here locally, whether it be the school buildings, the roads, the sidewalks, other important infrastructure for our community to, I think, succeed and continue the growth and success we've seen recently in this community, which is reflected in the tax revenue that's coming in and our property values. So what I want to suggest is, and I heard a lot of conversations about the 4 options. I want to recognize Mr. Goodard also and the excellent job he did in getting our bids in and competitive bids so we can start to make some great decisions. I've been waiting for those bids to come in for multiple years now. But that we take bold, courageous action here and go with the number 4. I think you guys were debating that school options without actually understanding all the surpluses, if I understand how this presentation learned out. I think you would probably now maybe be saying, yes, go for number 4 if you knew there was $10 million at least that we expect, plus I think $2 million that you're projecting even more now for next year, $15 million more there. And if I read that correctly, it's only $9 more million to get that auditorium. What I can tell you is that my child, who's in 4th grade right now, suffered through COVID not going to school. He's now looking at, because we've delayed taking action on, again, this remodel project, having to suffer through 2 years of remodel at Buford. My younger daughter, I am hoping, does not have to go through a lot of remodel. So I'm asking you to approve this auditorium also at the Performing Arts Center at the same time. So my second child doesn't have to have her school years interrupted at Buford Middle School going through another remodel. All right? In addition to all the other reasons why I think School Board Member Torres laid out, there's a lot of reasons why we should be doing this and doing it all at once. Efficiency, savings, et cetera. Let's not look back now, a couple years from now, and be like, oh, crap, it's $11 million. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Okay, do we have anyone online who would like to speak to us?
We do. Our first speaker is Asia Green.
Ms. Green, you have 3 minutes.
Hello, thank you for your time. My name is Asia Green, and I am the Public Housing Association of Residents Youth Coordinator, and I'm also a resident at 6th Street. This evening, I am asking the City Council to please fund the Forest Youth Program for next year. It is a terrifying time for our community right now. Youth violence is rising in Charlottesville and dramatically impacts our low-income youth. Most of the time, these children feel scared and powerless over their surroundings. They feel as if no one is listening, or they just don't care. For Our Youth program helps unite community organizations with our children living in public housing, with the primary goal of empowering these children and giving them the tools they need to uplift themselves and their community. With respect, before you decide to stop our children's funding, I implore you to go into the public housing sites and get to know the children you would be taking the funding from. Spend an afternoon with these amazing kids, and you will see they are worth investing in. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Green. So is there anyone else here or in person who would like to speak? And I apologize if somebody's behind the podium from me. Sure.
Lisa Torres. Again, I just want to thank everybody for the conversation. I continue to, every year, I understand this budgeting process a little bit more, although it's very complex. I continue to be impressed and amazed with Ms. Hamill and the work that you do, and seeing it all come together and how you present this. I mean, again, it makes a little bit more sense every year I hear it. But again, specific to the reconfiguration of our middle school, I mean, I think we've heard a lot of good information. I understand you all have a lot to consider. I'm excited about where we're at. I think we have momentum going for this project. I think the numbers came in better than a lot of people have anticipated, and we need to really, and I encourage you, please, to consider the Fine Arts Building and including that in, and we're going to stay positive and that things are going to happen one way or another to get that done, and that we need to then be looking and not forgetting our pre-K program, you know, that would be next in line down the road, but that is an important part. So we need to not forget that. So again, thank you for everything that you have presented. Hopefully what we presented answers some of the questions or fills in a few of those pieces. I mean, we're happy to receive questions as well, and thank you all.
Thank you, Ms. Torres. Do we have someone online?
Yes, our next speaker is Vicki Metcalf.
Ms. Metcalf, you have 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm Vicki Metcalf. I'm a member of the Tree Commission. We're asking you to approve our request for $75,000 for invasive plant removal. As you know, we've been raising the alarm about the decline in tree canopy in Charlottesville. We have large areas of non-native invasive vegetation that's harming our existing forests. We need to remove these in order to protect our existing canopy and to make room for potential new planting areas. We'll need to do mass plantings in order to increase our tree canopy. Since invasive plants outcompete natives, we need to get control of the invasives before we can successfully plant new trees. The current volunteer efforts to remove invasives aren't sufficient to allow us to accomplish this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Metcalf. Anyone else in person? Okay, seeing no one. Who's next online?
Karen Little.
Ms. Little, you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, City Council members. My name is Karen Little, and I'm the mother of a 7th grader at Buford and a 9th grader at CHS. I'm also involved with Charlottesville United for Public Education. Thank you so much for your commitment to the initial funding of the Buford redesign. I'm here to encourage you to fully fund the renovation, option 4, including the additional bids for the parking area, dining terrace, and the auditorium, to really give our middle schoolers the high quality learning they deserve. Without updating the auditorium, it will really serve as an eyesore in the midst of this new facility. And while I appreciate your creative thinking, having private funding come in to make up for an unwillingness to use our public dollars perpetuates a problem with underfunding crucial public investments like public education. 1974, that was actually the year I was born. And amazingly, the last time our city did a major investment in school infrastructure by building CHS, almost half a century, with Buford being another decade older. Hopefully I've aged better than our schools, but let's get this work done and be a model for other communities in really centering the needs of our children. Thank you for your time and for your support of Charlottesville youth and their families.
Thank you, Ms. Little. I'll repeat the call. Anybody else here in person?
Yes, our next speaker is Sandra Aviles Poe, and I apologize if I mispronounced that.
Good evening, City Council members, Mayor Snook. My name is Sandra Aviles Poe. I'm the community organizer for Charlottesville United for Public Education. And first off, I just want to say how happy these budget work sessions make me. Hearing all of the updates for reconfiguration is very exciting, especially for those of us who work towards trying to reach the best educational experience for our students. On behalf of Charlottesville United, we would like to ask that we do everything possible to account for all necessary renovations for Buford reconfiguration project. And with inflation being a big concern, we strongly believe it would be well worth budgeting the auditorium now versus later. We have one middle school serving all of our Charlottesville City School students, and they deserve these much needed updates. Also, thinking back to the most recent Charlottesville City Schools Identified Priorities survey, we had mental health and social emotional wellness voted in as the #1 priority. So I think that having these nature-based hands-on projects like the Buford Middle School Garden that was discussed today are going to be very, very essential and a very positive effect on our children and should definitely be prioritized. I also want to say thank you to everybody that showed up from our community: Chris Meyer, Asia Green, Lisa Torres, Vicky Metcalf, Karen Little. Thank you to all of our city council members for your continued efforts, and thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. Next.
Okay, our next speaker is Brandon Ertel.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, I want to say thank you guys. My name is Brandon Ertel, and I'm here to support the FAR Youth Program. And personally, from what I've seen, and with the FAR Youth Program, I've seen how positive, a positive change within inside the community, and I've seen how it affects the. I'm so sorry. I'm so nervous. My apologies. From what I've seen is, I've seen that it encourages children to be more creative. It gives them an opportunity to express themselves in ways they might not necessarily have a way to. And I just appreciate you guys' time, and I feel that the youth program is a very necessary thing that we need for this community. And just thank you guys for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
There are no more hands raised at this time.
All right. Last call. Anybody here in person? Okay, and nobody else online? All right, so we can close the public hearing. If anybody wants to have other public comment, I will remind everybody that if you send an email to council@charlottesville.gov, it goes to all of us. I think it's fair to say we've been getting a fair number of emails in the last few weeks, and we will continue to get them and read them. Speaking for myself, I don't have time to respond to all of them, but please know that we do read them. Also, we will have public comment at the April 3rd meeting on Monday of council, although there won't be formally a public hearing on the budget. Any public comment period basically can include a comment on the budget. What would be useful to you all going forward from us tonight?
You've mentioned some items that you want us to pay attention to. And we would like you to continue that dialogue and hear from you so that we can come on the 6th for the exercise that we went through last year. Here's your list. Here's the money. And as you make decisions, you know, we allocate, and then the bottom line, the available funds disappear to zero.
Right.
Okay.
And to that point, not to open up a whole other can of worms, but two relatively significant items that we didn't discuss today are the K-Tech acquisition and then the Housing Authority acquisition of the Dogwood housing portfolio, which we both know are underway. And an update on this Monday, the Housing Authority passed their own resolution that they
they're ready to go forward with it and have $5 million 0% interest rate loan from a private partner, and are waiting for clarity from the city. So both with K-Tech and Dogwood, kind of what is the next steps to provide clarity on what our decision is and how we're moving forward?
There's, on April 3rd, there's an action giving council an opportunity to approve that appropriation with the anticipated funding source being bond proceeds.
For K-Tech.
For K-Tech.
But
No,
I'm sorry. For Dogwood.
For Dogwood, right.
But that would happen this present fiscal year, not the budget year that we're working on next.
Correct.
Yes.
And that'll be Monday night.
And then if we're doing anything with K-Tech, or what we will be doing with K-Tech, will also not be in FY '24.
That would be bond.
It would be in FY '25.
On bond sales, yes. Then bond sales
So,
in June.
Just to make sure I'm tracking. So for both of these items, you're saying that they will be in FY '25?
23 this year.
Okay, so how does that, I guess you book them, as it were, for this fiscal year, and will that end up coming out of our hope for surplus, or how does that work?
They're going to be bonds. So if you keep in mind the chart that I showed you was for $156 million of bonds, 129 we've allocated through the 5-year CIP. These would be in addition to that. So again, you're just, in the debt service projections that I gave you, it's not those specific projects, obviously, but there was extra debt built into that. So they would just be using up that extra piece,
Right.
if you will.
So it doesn't materially change the projections we saw
Correct.
earlier tonight?
Right.
Correct.
This is not, neither would be a general fund impact, except in terms of bond payments, debt service payments.
And neither of them would reflect anything that would show up directly in the FY '24 budget that we're working on in the next few weeks.
Correct.
Right.
So if I can
Okay,
just make
thank you.
a plug for your work on the 6th, as we work through that spreadsheet last year, in anticipation of the school project and the increased debt service, you all made a commitment, and with the year-end appropriation, we approved like $4 million. The extra money that went to the debt service fund, which helps us buy down some of that general fund transfer. I would also make the same plea for some of that as you consider that part of that expected surplus for 24. I'm sorry, for 23.
Yeah. We have, we've heard you. You said you wanted some flexibility to address some issues you had. You have that flexibility in terms of what we presented tonight from the new revenue. And there's also opportunity with the projected 23 surplus. But we always say that think about feeding the capital improvement fund and, going forward. That allows us to do other things.
And yeah, I mean, no matter what, I don't know how the exact numbers shake out, but agree, some portion of it probably very likely makes sense to go to the CIP. In terms of kind of other priorities in that conversation about the general fund and potentially the year-end surplus, some of the things, I continue to be concerned about are the funding for pathways, in terms of that being an avenue to prevent homelessness and eviction, in the impact of the ARPA money ending. I think it's important to prioritize that. We heard a couple people speak about the FAR youth program. I think that, as well as other youth programs, and some of the mentorship and youth programs focused on youth in our neighborhoods, as well as some that are specifically focused on gun violence, would be important to try to provide funding for. I think we just recognize it's an all hands on deck situation right now, and I think it's worth making that investment in youth programs. And likewise, another thing that's jumped out is Is there a way to support the Housing Authority in terms of their operations as we make significant investments in their capital needs? How do we ensure that they're going to have the internal staff capacity to operate?
Okay.
And I also agree with the mayor's point about the public defender's office and in OAR.
Could I also ask, I think we have heard before about, certainly we've heard folks talking about the fact that AHIP has at least not yet received any suggested funding. Is the HOPS process moving along at all? Is that something that we're going to have a decision on in the next week or two, or what?
Yes, HOPS is settled. It'll be coming before you
Part of the budget resolution.
as a part of the budget resolution. I'm sorry, I had to make sure I was saying the right thing. And then the CAF is still under consideration. The committee has not made that final deliberations yet.
Well, that's right. Okay, it was a CAF that we had.
Right.
Yeah.
So they were not funded within HOPS because their application was deemed ineligible as that was operating support, and it was brick and mortar work that they were asking for support.
Okay. So is there going to be, I mean, I know we try to put things like Vibrant Community Fund awards in the actual budget itself.
Mhm.
Is there any thought that we will be wanting to do the same thing with CAF approved funding?
So CAF funding is approved in the CIP as part of the appropriation, the regular budget ordinance, the CIP. And then those allocations, when we would do a separate memo
Be separate.
that would come to council.
But it's not something that we would be expecting to put in this budget document itself the way we do the Vibrant Community Fund awards.
We just have it in as a lump sum.
Uh-huh.
Now, the HOPS items that would be listed.
They are. They are
Because they
specifically
are
identified.
formally a part of ECF, so they will actually be listed, and then CAF is separate.
All right.
But the one switch just for that, so as you think about this, previously those agencies were funded out of the general fund. And so when you go to that book and you look at PHA, AHIP, or any of these other agencies, they will show a 0 for 24 and will continue to do that because that funding will now be part of the CIP and it will show as CAF expenditures. They won't show as individual agencies other than in the budget ordinance.
Well, the one thing I wanted to ask about is, one of the things that I have tried to suggest over the last year and a half, being mayor, year and a quarter, whatever it's been, has been that we get information as early as possible before we have to make a decision. And I always hated the notion that we would get something at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and have to make a decision by 7:30. If we were to adopt the theory that counselors would be better informed the earlier that we get whatever final reconciliations you all have, what would be an appropriate deadline for you to give to us for the suggestions and issues that we might want to raise with you?
So I would say for the revenue, I think we're pretty set. We probably won't have any more changes. So I think we're at the 2.194 for 24. If you want to make adjustments within the general fund, I think that's where you are.
Okay, my question is, if we've got things, for example, as I raised tonight, the question about the drug court, for you to be able to do what you need to do, you need it before you would be producing the report for us. I don't want any of us to be making a decision on the fly.
So I think we can do that next Thursday.
Yeah.
If we can do that next Thursday, then we would have it ready for the second reading on the 11th. Is that what you mean?
Yeah,
That's fine, yeah, so as long as we would that be something where we should get stuff to you by Tuesday, let's say, so that you're ready to incorporate it into something that you might?
Into our list, yes.
Yeah,
That
so,
would
we
work.
can have the list to talk through all those items,
Yeah.
yes.
Right.
I want to get the list, I want people to see the list, all of us to see the list at least 24 hours before we're going to be asked to make even a first reading recommendation.
Could I add some more work for council?
Sure.
We're going to be meeting on the strategic plan, was that the 16th and 17th? In May, the middle of May, coming up. And 19th and 20th, right. So I would hope that you would consider individually and collectively what projects you would like to invest in as part of your strategic plan, process as well. And that would be a combination of maybe the 24, well, that comes after the budget, but mostly the year-end surplus, which gives you some opportunities for investment.
So Mr. Sanders just had a good idea. If you could shoot for noon on Tuesday, we have a standing budget meeting at 2 on Tuesdays.
Okay.
And that would give us time to sort of coordinate and get things ready. And then we could get it to you, commit to get it to you, back to you by, noon on Wednesday? And that would give you Wednesday afternoon and all day Thursday.
That would make sense.
Also, are those items required to also go to the public? We would have to consider, if you're given materials to consider for the meeting, that it would possibly have to go to the public also.
Is that, but the 6th is not a voting meeting?
So we can check with legal.
Yeah, I don't, that's a good question. I'm not sure. It's not, but.
Yeah. The 6th is not a voting meeting, so.
Well, we can sort that out.
Yeah.
We don't need to do it.
So yeah, I'll get my comments to you, that I have by Tuesday at noon.
Tuesday noon.
It's been a long day, so I'll just wait.
Okay. Counselors, any other?
Did Counselor Pinkston have anything?
Brian, you with us?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Any further thoughts?
So I know that, so we only work on a 5-year CIP. Are we thinking, so Ms. Torres brought up, are y'all able to hear me? Seems like I've lost it. Yeah, okay. Yeah, she brought up Walker and the work there. I also wonder about West Haven. I saw we only have $3 million from CRHA. I'm assuming that's because they haven't made a formal request for years 4 and 5. I guess, Ms. Hamill, when you're doing your budgeting and you're thinking in terms of years out, how far out makes sense to think? How far out does it make sense to project? One observation that I'll just relay when I came on council a year ago was just, frankly surprised at the fact that we had this really large school project that had been in a low number, and I'm not sure really how long it had even been in the overall tracking. So, I mean, my point is, if we know we're going to be doing something at West Haven, if we know we'd like to invest in a shelter for the homeless, maybe those don't show up on the CIP, but maybe there's some way we're able to think about our debt capacity more than 5 years out, like 10 years out. I wonder, I'm just offering that as I'd be interested in hearing more conversation from you about it, maybe at some other point. But I do think we have some large things we want to do in the future in the city, and even going past 5 years would be perhaps wise.
Maybe that's a strategic planning topic.
Yeah,
And best practice.
Yeah.
And
we usually do 5 year, but I understand the point.
Yeah.
One thing I would just say that with that is that I think on the project side, it's a little bit hard. Obviously, if we have big projects that we know are coming, we certainly should be keeping that. From a debt perspective, a lot of times it's easy to project further out because you then get to take advantage of debt falling off and new projects coming on, and so maintaining that. One thing to keep in mind though, because we are sort of in a cycle where we are adding a large amount of debt in a very short period of time, we won't have that advantage. And so we can look at the debt projection, and I do have one, it's on out there, and we can talk about that. But, you know, I guess from a project perspective, how comprehensive we can do that, I'm not sure, but certainly we should look at these big ones that you have on your.
Yeah, I wonder, you know, if you think about if West Haven is going to be a thing or other projects from the CRHA, I would think that they're going to be wanting investments in, you know, 3 years from now, at the very least in preliminary studies to get that project underway. And, you know, I guess the same for the Walker project. I just, again, just reflecting on when I came on council a year ago, it's like, it felt like people were really kind of trying to swallow this large project at Buford. It just felt like that can had been kicked down the road for a really long time. And I understand why there are other priorities, but I think that if we're confident we're going to do something in 5, 6, 7 years, then 3 or 4 years from now, we should have some kind of initial projection about studies or whatever. So that's what I would offer. I also wonder, Mr. Mayor, you know, returning to the issue of Buford and what direction we want to give Mr. Goddard tonight. Do we need to have further conversation? I mean, about whether we want to just go ahead and allocate part of the projected surplus to this extra building, or do we want to tell him to proceed on a, you know, he needs some direction, I think.
So let me just interject before you get too far. We cannot allocate the surplus because it doesn't exist.
That's right.
So
Right.
The only thing we can do at this point is if you want to do the full freight of the project, then the revenue sources that we have available to us right now would either be to fund the rest of it out of the contingency or to add bond proceeds. And then we can adjust once we know more, because we're not going to, I mean, we have to have the budget to issue the contract, so it's all got to be in this year, and we've got to show how we're going to pay for it. We have the ability to change that as we go down the road, but we can't do, other than the surplus piece is just, you know, idea at
Right.
this point.
So at this point, you have 7.5 million remaining unallocated in contingency. To fund the auditorium out of that would be 6.8, was that the number?
6.9, I think.
Yeah, okay, so that will not leave very much room in the contingency, but if we are successful in getting the grant, perhaps we can reimburse the contingency once that's received. But for approval of the project, we need a firm source that we have in hand now, and that's a decision that council can make.
And the practice would be, unless further allocated, that any surplus at the end of this year would go back into the capital and contingency fund.
Some portion of it, yes.
Well, anything that wasn't otherwise allocated.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I guess with the grant, if that comes in, that would be lovely. But I think we just, if we are planning to, and if sort of the consensus, and I'm not sure what the consensus is, but if we were to decide tonight that, yeah, we want to go ahead and fund that whole project, I think we should just go ahead. I understand the point that Ms. Hamill made that we're going to have to make clear decisions now about, you know, how we fund it within our current processes. But I don't think we should assume that grant is going to happen, and we should just go ahead and say, hey, our expectation is that we will have to use the projected surplus to make ourselves whole on this.
I guess where I'm at is still kind of the perspective of, at the moment, going with the auditorium contingent on receiving the grant. I don't know what that looks like. And I'm certainly open to more conversation about saying, you know, with our projected year-end surplus, is there, you know, do you allocate that to the CIP? I just feel like I'm making a decision without full information just because we haven't gamed out what all the allocations look like, as well as like what inflation cost increases are for existing investments, and I just want to be able to make a decision with full information, I guess.
The full information you have is that you have $7.65 million in contingency that could be allocated to fund the full cost of the project, including the auditorium. That's what you can do now, knowing that there's a possibility that we will get the grant. And even if we don't get the grant, you're able to rebuild the contingency and the CIP with the year-end capital surplus.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the unknown is just we don't know, or we haven't had any discussion of what, if anything, may need that contingency beyond funding the auditorium. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we got you.
Well, I guess I will officially reconsider my earlier comments that with the assurance that we are going to have somewhere in the neighborhood of $13 to $15 million of the surplus as it is looking now, with the assurance that I shouldn't say assurance, with the possibility of the grant, that there are at least the two sources that are independent of each other, that are each adequate to cover it if we don't end up doing anything else. I'm okay with saying let's make the commitment. Again, it's not a vote per se tonight, but it would be, I'm okay with making the commitment to say let's go ahead and build the auditorium. That would be option, I don't have the chart in front of me now, but basically of the options that were given to us, funding everything except the garden, which we figured we would do in-house. And I'm okay with that, and perhaps as an expression of the sentiment of council, subject to being officially approved in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I will be in the same camp with that. I think it was School Board Member Dooley said that it's not going to get any cheaper, so I will support option 4, and hopefully we will get that grant, because we have a lot of projects to do, but spending several hours in the Buford Auditorium for a project this weekend for something that our fraternity was doing, it's
50 years old.
Yeah, it's in bad shape.
You got a mic?
I'll proceed structuring the contract, give us the outs we need. I'll assume that we, for now, are planning on going with the auditorium renovation. We will have some time while the contract is being put together, negotiated, and sent through the channels. So I'll provide an update through the city manager's update process as I learn more. But I'm sure I can find out some things tomorrow, Monday.
Good.
Thank you.
And
Mr. Goddard, I just want to reiterate what's been said earlier. Really appreciate your leadership, and Wick Knox, I see him there as well, getting us to this point. It's taken a lot of work on y'all's part, and your professionalism is really excellent.
Thank you.
If I could, I guess, Councilor Payne, I'm going to ask you a question to make sure that I'm understanding what you're worried about. Are you, when you reference other escalation, are you talking about other projects that we're committed to, that you're worried about them not necessarily being fully funded?
correct, and I mean, it's kind of to Councilor Pinkston's earlier point, it's never the fun thing to do, but thinking 5 years down the road, the investments we know we need to make in not even just Walker, but other schools, West Haven, other capital projects, a combination of that we know we need to make the investment and we haven't incorporated in our budget yet, and then also what is the cost escalation going to be for every other project that's already in our CIP, and it's just, it's an unknown that's really hard to game out, and that's always what I worry about, is just you inadvertently didn't plan for that well enough.
Right, and that's, is that my bedtime? No, and
It says it's time to go home.
Yes, it is.
to
Councilor
make
Payne, I think that is exactly what has been happening to Buford, over the years, that we didn't adequately plan for it, and that's kind of why we.
Well, and I agree with that, and it's why it was such a challenge to get there last year, and, I know we remain committed to it, and you've got the future phases. But again, I mean, it's just how do we look at everything as a whole? And I'm not even saying I wouldn't support it, even without the grant. It's just like, I feel like we don't know all the unknowns.
Yeah.
I would suggest to you that one thing that we can do, and Mike is going to have to help me along with a few other members of my team, we can do a quick scan of projects that we know are committed for this next year and just confirm that we know the latest in budget projection and cost projections, and at least assure you for this one single year that we are referencing in budget planning, you have as much comfort as possible. I'm thinking of bypass fire station as one thing we will confirm for you. He's telling me don't say this, but I'm saying it anyway. We'll figure out where we are enough to give you as much of an assurance as we can, and we'll just have to deal with the out years and the out years.
And the only other thing is if we could just get like an estimate of like, because my gut is when we look at our surplus, that the amount we need to allocate to the CIP contingency to cover that increase is like pretty easily handleable. I don't know. But
Easily handle it.
I like it. It'd just be good to know the exact number, even though my gut is it seems like we would be able to do that even without the grant. I just like to know as much information.
We can do a quick scan.
Yeah, and just because, again, I want the team to have the certainty they need, and it sounds like Mr. Goddard does have that. I'll just, it sounds like the consensus of the group is that we feel like there is, and the way I'm looking at this, honestly, is, I've been an advocate for this project from the get-go. I just wanted us to be thoughtful about, the escalation that's occurred and sort of the decisions that were made last year. And, I can get behind this extra portion of it, given the fact that we are looking to have surpluses, a certain significant surplus this year. And I think that will actually materialize. And given that, high likelihood, I'm personally willing to go ahead and endorse option 4 as well, given that fact.
Okay. There's nothing else to be discussed. We're adjourned. Thank you all for coming.